farmers, women who are hairdressers and so forth, who've been generally affected. And the responsibility must be to ensure and secure the employment and the empowerment of women, particularly also in ensuring equal pay for women and men, equal pay in positions as well as equal opportunity for women to be employed in senior positions. Okay, thank you very much.
Very much, and thank you for quite a profound input. And I'm glad we left you towards the end, because your message will remain with us for a while. In this section of the program, our last respondent is Dr. Oscar van Heerden from the Mpumalanga Institute. And unfortunately, we won't have time for anyone else. Do apologize. We have a 4:00 deadline. So we'll move on to Dr. van Heerden.
Thanks, DSG. It's the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection.
Oh, my apologies.
No problem. Just very briefly, Chair, I want to make a few points. One, it has been 296 years of colonialism, 46 years of apartheid, and only 26 years of democracy. And so I think it's important that the Freedom Charter is a charter that is in response to that legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And so I do think that we must not put ourselves under enormous pressure to try and deliver on the Freedom Charter clauses within a too short time, because we are trying to redress a very long history of colonialism and apartheid. So we must set ourselves realistic targets over the next few years to try and realize the clauses. Secondly, I think that in as much as the Freedom Charter starts with South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, I do think as the ANC, we have not spent sufficient time actively to deal with issues of race and identity politics within the country. We are seen to be too reactive when it comes to racism within society, and I think the ANC should really be in the forefront to lead, actively engaging on the question of race and identity politics, as we can see our young people trying to grapple with some of these issues today. I also want to say, DSG, that of course we are a broad church as the ANC, and so we don't always have to agree with each other. We must be critical, and we must disagree where we can. And so even though the input from Comrade Rasool on the national question is an important one, and indeed the issue between the national question and the colored question, but I think as the ANC, it's time we do put on record a discussion on the Khoi and the San people who feel that the very terminology, black in general and Africans in particular, is actually excluding them as a group within South Africa. And I think it's time we do engage on that issue. On higher education or education generally, I agree that quality is an important thing. We need to look at quality within the education, but we do need to ask the question, if we say free education, free for who? Because if 100 learners enter grade 1, 12 of those learners are the ones that then make it to university, and 4 of those 12 are from no-fee schools. The other 8 are from fees-paying schools. And so if we say free education, I would argue that it should be free for those 4 students who are from poor and working-class communities, and not necessarily for everyone. And then finally, DSG, there is a report 2 years ago, the Institute for Race Relations produced a report on state of the nation, and I think it's a good measure to gauge and to measure ourselves against in terms of how we've progressed with satisfying the Freedom Charter clauses. And I raise the IRR because in recent times they have not been our friends, and so that report is surely should be seen as independent and unbiased, and it's actually a very good report. It shows that as the governing party, we have done very well in actually progressing within our democracy and providing for the poorest of the poor. And finally, Chair, I want to say that we are not doing too badly. We should pat ourselves on the back as the ANC, 26 years down the line. And in fact, we have produced 5 of the clauses within the 10 of the Freedom Charter. We can tick and say done unconditionally. And those are equal before the law, the people shall govern, and many others. The other 5 is an ongoing thing. It is not something that you will ever be able to say we've attained the end of it. And so as the ANC, I think that this has been a very interesting and a very good conversation, and we should take comfort in the fact that I think we are very well on the way to providing for the poorest of the poor within South Africa. Thank you, DSG.
Thank you very much, Comrade Oscar. We've come to the end of session 1 and session 2, and one can only say that this has been a rich debate. The only pity is that you give people 3 minutes, which is definitely not enough, to discuss quite a fundamental set of issues. We've all heard, and the country's been listening as well. And we've now come to the point where, Comrade President, you've heard the provinces, you've heard some experts, independent voices, you've heard some criticism of the ANC, you've also heard some praise. And it is our considerable honor now to invite you to make a keynote address. Comrade President.
Thank you, Comrade DSG.
Comrade President, you're on mute.
Deputy President and officials of the ANC, officials of the SACP and COSATU, all the other structures of our movement, comrades and friends, I really truly welcome this opportunity as we commemorate the 67th anniversary of the Freedom Charter. It is also a moment for us to celebrate the existence of our iconic document and the manner in which it was drafted. It is a moment also to go down memory lane, to reflect on this document that changed the trajectory of our country. And it is good that we commemorate the Freedom Charter during our country's Youth Month. The Freedom Charter is the lodestar, and better still, the bedrock and the foundation of South Africa's constitutional democracy. In many ways, it provides a sterling example of how a people acting together were able to craft a clear vision of the South Africa that they wanted. South Africa was an oppressive and inhumane place for the masses of our people. At the time when the Freedom Charter was drafted, the apartheid regime was becoming even more bolder, and it was intensifying its vicious actions to subjugate the people of our country and suppress them as they were struggling and fighting for their liberation and equality. We are pleased that our forebears felt the need and indeed the duty to respond to this oppressive regime. This situation did require that the People's Organization, the African National Congress, should respond decisively, and respond decisively it did. This is what led the ANC at its 42nd conference to make a call for the convening of a Congress of the People, which would, in the words of our late comrade Joe Slovo, allow each South African to say for himself and herself what they desire from life. The ANC, together with its allies in the Congress Alliance, made a simple call. This call was, let the people speak. Very typical of the African National Congress. And I'm delighted that this DNA has remained deeply embedded in the sinew, in the blood, and the body of the African National Congress, where over the 108 years of its existence, it has always felt that the people must speak. And 65 years ago, indeed, the people did speak. This simple call to unify South Africans around a common vision was seen as a great threat by the then illegal regime. They understood with perfect clarity that their message of hate and division would not survive once the people were united against them. Our movement did what it has always done best. It sent out nearly 50,000 volunteers into the townships, into the villages across the country to collect the demands of the people in the face of great danger. Now, I'm saying this advisedly so that we all remember the DNA of our movement and where our movement comes from. Thousands of our people gathered in Kliptown on Sunday, the 26th August 1955, and despite relentless harassment and violence from the state machinery, this Congress of the People adopted the Freedom Charter. Now, History Online says it so succinctly, and it says that the campaign for the Congress of the People and the Freedom Charter transformed what was essentially an urban-based movement into a fully fledged national movement. Organizational advances were made in the rural areas as a result of volunteers going around the country collecting demands and making invaluable political contact with people in the rural areas and interacting with traditional leaders, religious leaders, the intelligentsia, and ordinary people, traders and farmers and what have you. Precisely what we continue to do today. We're the only movement that has a wall-to-wall existence and presence throughout the country. The campaign also revived Congress branches in the urban areas that had been weakened after the aftermath of the Defiance campaign. The campaign led to the establishment of numerous local branches as well. And the campaign also introduced within the liberation movement a degree of ideological uniformity and cohesion that did not exist previously. It also succeeded in minimizing ideological feuding and rivalry among members of the Congress. And it's important we should reflect on this. It is during campaigns of whatever nature, and this one was the most iconic campaign ever embarked upon in the history of our country. That it is when we campaign that we are able to unify our movement, to have ideological clarity, and to have greater focus. The type of focus that we also need right now as we are fighting against COVID-19. The Freedom Charter gave greater content and meaning to abstract goals such as freedom, national liberation, and self-determination of the African masses. It gave concrete detail and substance to the slogan, freedom in our lifetime, by articulating what that freedom would mean in practical terms in various spheres of South African life. The Charter provided a clear and concise set of policies. It set out clear aims and objectives and principles of the Congress Alliance. And it also served as a vision of a post-apartheid South Africa, which was to be used as a mobilizing and organizing weapon in the struggle for democracy. And did it do so? It did. The Freedom Charter, from the day it was adopted, became the rallying call throughout the country as each one of us got involved in the struggle, remembered what had been enshrined in the Freedom Charter. The most remarkable feature of this campaign was that it attempted to do what had never been done before in the history of South Africa. It allowed ordinary people, irrespective of race, language, sex, religion, place of origin, class, educational standard, personal beliefs, values, and organizational affiliation, to speak about simple things such as their hopes and their dreams of the future. The adoption of the Freedom Charter by the Congress of the People and subsequently by each component of the Congress Alliance signified a major break with the past traditions of the South African struggle. This was no longer a civil rights movement seeking to be accommodated in the existing socio-economic and political structures of society. It called for a fundamental restructuring of all aspects of South African society and life. The Congress of the People had placed the question of social transformation squarely on the agenda of the liberation movement in South Africa. Now there came into being a national liberation movement. The president of the ANC at the time, Chief Albert Luthuli, described the Congress of the People by saying, "Why will this assembly be significant and unique?" he asked. Its size, he said, I hope, will make it unique, but above all, its multiracial nature and its noble objectives will make it unique because it will be the first time in the history of our multiracial nation that is people from all walks of life will meet as equals, irrespective of race, color, creed, to formulate a freedom charter for all the people in the country. Close quotes. The editorial of the New Age of the 30th June 1955 characterized the Congress of the People as the most spectacular and moving demonstration this country had ever seen. And through it, the people had given proof that they had the ability and the power to triumph over obstacles and win the future of their dreams. Our stalwart, Comrade Walter Sisulu Sitwalandwe, shared the view of many that the Congress of the People was the most highly organized campaign the movement had ever undertaken. It had, he said, sealed the Congress Alliance as a formidable force and had produced and consolidated it around a common political program that would survive the test of time. And as expected, the apartheid regime instructed its security apparatus to ensure that the Congress of the People did not take place. They held up buses, arrested those who did not have passes, they jailed them. But even as they confiscated documents, our people, our forebears, adopted the Freedom Charter by shouts of acclaim and ululations. The apartheid regime had failed. A people united in their determination to craft their own vision of the South Africa they wanted succeeded in gathering messages, notes, some of which were written on toilet paper, on scraps of paper, on leather. They had succeeded in expressing their views. Drafters such as Z.K. Matthews, Rusty Bernstein, and many others had compiled all these inputs. The demands of the Freedom Charter are breathtaking in their commitment to equality, justice, and freedom. And comrades, truth be told, there is no document that is like the Freedom Charter in the world. Yes, one can compare it with the Universal Declaration of Rights, of Human Rights, but the Freedom Charter is unique, and I know of no document that has been drafted in the same way as the Freedom Charter. So today, we celebrate this iconic document, and I've related all this so that we can know the legacy that we have. We should also know what we have inherited. We should also know that as we now execute the task of implementing the Freedom Charter, we stand on the shoulders of the giants who have preceded us, who struggled to have this document drafted as they did. The Freedom Charter is clear that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. This entrenched commitment to non-racialism should permeate through the very fabric of South African society. It is a commitment that was made by our forebears, and we must live up to it. Unfortunately, South Africa and the world are seeing a rise in tearing down this very important aspiration that was set out by our forebears in the Freedom Charter. As we see a rise in racism, discrimination that's based on ethnicity, and narrow nationalism. It is for this reason that the ANC and the Alliance has embarked on a campaign against racism. And I applaud our structures of our alliance and our leaders and members for having taken up the cudgels against racism. We must embark on concerted campaigns to root out racism across our country and indeed across the world. We must continue to work with progressive forces on our continent and the globe to stamp out racism, intolerance of whatever nature, even intolerance against what is clearly set out in our Constitution, against any form of sexual orientation that people want to embark on. At this point in time, our country faces enormous challenges. We are in the midst of a global pandemic unlike anything the world has ever seen in more than 100 years. Our already underperforming economy has contracted further because of the impact of the pandemic. Lastly, there is another pandemic that is raging in our country. There is a war that the men of South Africa have declared against the women of our country. The women of our country. Gender-based violence and femicide are twin scourges that we need to eradicate. All these challenges require us to call on the determination and the resilience of our forebears in the way they approached the challenge of apartheid repression as they drafted the Freedom Charter in the face of danger and death that faced them at the time. This time requires us to again unite and work to put in place the South Africa that we want. The Freedom Charter is explicit in its call that the people shall share in the wealth of our country. A number of comrades have already spoken on this matter. It is undeniable that the wealth of this country remains largely in the hands of a predominantly white and male minority. This must change. The structure of our economy continues to exclude the overwhelming numbers of our people, the poor and the black majority. Our movement, government, and all social partners must work together to bring about radical transformation of the economy and achieve economic inclusion. And this COVID moment gives us that opportunity, which we must grasp. For out of this crisis, there is opportunity. The flip side of a crisis is opportunity, and all we have to do is to turn the coin around and look at the opportunity that the crisis is ushering in. The program of economic restructuring must be anchored on an agreed vision of a more just and equitable economy that works for all. We will have to confront the reality that there will be significant and disastrous job losses as a result of COVID-19. Our plans will have to ensure that there is work and security as set out in the Freedom Charter. This is a process that will take time. We plan to embark on major job creation interventions such as huge infrastructure projects. And the infrastructure projects that we foresee are going to be countrywide, and they will touch all the provinces of our country, and we see them as catalytic projects. We recently held a symposium where we brought together various entities, both local and international, to come and invest. The office that we have established in the presidency has now been able to craft projects to make them bankable, to make them shovel-ready. And we are now, during this COVID period, going to be ready to ensure that the lost jobs that will be lost, we will regain some as we begin to unfold the various infrastructure projects. Why are we doing this? The growth of an economy often revolves around infrastructure, and of course manufacturing and a number of other sectors. We are going to lay emphasis on infrastructure and other sectors, including new sectors of our economy. The COVID moment gives us that chance to craft and create new sectors and to be able to mobilize resources, to crowd in those with money, both local and offshore, so that we can have a greater deal of focus on the economic growth trajectory that we must embark upon. So we will use the infrastructure as a launch pad to grow our economy. The Freedom Charter demands of us to ensure that the land shall be shared amongst those who work it. This talks to the systematic dispossession of land, which remains one of the greatest injustices suffered by black people in the history of our country. We are addressing this heinous crime against our people. The mandate of the 54th National Conference on the question of returning land to the people of our country is clear, and it was right, and it will be implemented. Our program of returning land to the people is going to gain more and more momentum, as we have already started. We have already started with the process of returning land, but in the end, we are going to be insisting that the process that we have started in Parliament should be finalized so that there should be greater clarity under which conditions the expropriation of land without compensation will take place, so that we can return the land to the people of our country. There is significant scope to increase manufacturing and job creation in the agricultural sector throughout the length and the breadth of our country. The Freedom Charter calls on us to ensure that there shall be houses, security and comfort. COVID-19 pandemic has revealed more starkly that too many South Africans do not have adequate houses. As part of our infrastructure build program, we will accelerate our interventions to build more sustainable human settlements and assist South Africans to obtain housing. This is an overriding objective that we must achieve. We must also ensure that as we proceed with this, we address the challenges that our people continue to face when it comes, for instance, young people especially, to education. The right to education needs to be properly fulfilled. Yes, the young people took to the streets and demanded that there should be a right to education. And we've done a great deal in assisting children from poor families and working class families with funding, and the access that our children have now had in education is quite enormous. We are on the way to fulfilling the dream that was articulated by our forebears in the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter is clear that we should also proceed with greater effect to make sure that the governance of our country is put right. We must also make sure that at local government level, the people do govern indeed, and they do participate in the governance of their local areas. Service delivery is part of the right that our people want to see fulfilled, that the people shall govern, and that their needs and aspirations should also be met at the local level with service delivery. This is something that we should not put aside and forget. We should also make sure that as we proceed to do this, we realize the importance that local government plays in uplifting the lives of our people. Apartheid caused a lot of devastation, even in the areas where our people live. So therefore, that is exactly where we must uplift our people so that they have proper sanitation, they have proper water, they have proper housing, they have proper roads. These are some of the minute issues that we sometimes lose sight of when we talk about the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter spoke about our people having a better life, and our government has committed itself to precisely this. Today, we also talk about the war that has been declared on the women of our country. Freedom Charter spoke about people living in comfort and security. It is a travesty that women and children in our country feel unsafe, and they feel that, and the reality they face is that they are being abused, they are being raped, and they are being killed. The government has enacted many laws and is strengthening the criminal justice system to more effectively deal with gender-based violence. Effective laws and more policing will not be enough on their own. We need all of society to work together to effectively deal with gender-based violence and all other social ills. All of society needs to work together to combat gender-based violence and femicide by confronting patriarchal norms and attitudes and acting at all times in a manner that respects the rights and the lives of women. This is an important task that as leaders of the Alliance we must lead on. We need to engage our structures in campaigns to change the minds of our citizens and stamp out the behavior that treat women as inferior and as property. Silence about gender-based violence is one of the greatest contributing and enabling factors to this crime. No longer should we be silent. We must call out perpetrators without fear or favor. We further need to focus on the economic and social empowerment of women, actively working to ensure women have a greater stake in the economy of our country. We should also be the ones, as the Alliance, to be championing the rights of people who live with disabilities. We should also be the ones in the Alliance to champion the rights of people who are part of the LGBTQI community. We are the ones who lead society. Just as the Congress Alliance in the 50s led society by crafting the Freedom Charter, it is also the mandate that we have to lead society, to ensure that all these areas of intolerance, and including the abuse of women, are brought to an end. In conclusion, the brave men and women who worked together to draft the Freedom Charter did so in the face of enormous and tremendous challenges. We now face our own enormous challenges. We need to unite as South Africans, but we also firstly need to unite as the Alliance and draw on the indomitable spirit and example of our forebears. South Africans have worked together to overcome many great difficulties, and they worked together led by the Congress movement. This Congress movement must now lead our country as we proceed out of COVID-19. For COVID-19 imposes a number of duties on us, and the very first one is to make sure that we arrest the spread of the virus and spread the message to all our people to ensure that we wear our masks, we have social distancing, and it is through these that we will be able to arrest the spread of the virus. As we speak now, we continue to move more and more towards the peak. And we can turn things around, and it is behoven on this movement, on the alliance, to deal with this crisis and also to look out for the opportunities on the flip side of this crisis so that our country can move forward. Ahead of us lie a lot of tasks. I believe that, like the men and women who drafted the Freedom Charter and created a vision for our country, we will be men and women enough and be able to craft a clear vision that will lead us out of this crisis and get us into the opportunities we need to get into, as our forebears did when they confronted the apartheid state and drafted the Freedom Charter, which has given us the democracy that we have today. I thank you.
All right, so we come out of that webinar that's currently taking place, organized by the ANC. As we said earlier, that today marks the 65th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter, which happened on this day back in 1955 in Kliptown in Soweto. So we have just seen the President of the African National Congress there, Cyril Ramaphosa, giving that keynote address. Basically, the speech centered around the 10 pillars that we reflected on here on the show a little earlier on. The president saying that ANC had made that call with the alliance that the people should speak. Hence, there was that Congress of the People that happened in that year. And he says that it was an iconic campaign that they have ever embarked on as the ruling party in the history of the movement. So he says there is no document like the Freedom Charter in the world. It is unique in its own, and no other document has ever been drafted like the Freedom Charter. So he says it's important to celebrate this day so that we know our legacy as South Africans. So the president there touching on a number of things, as I said, that his speech, of course, centered around the 10 pillars. He touched on the COVID-19, saying that it has affected the already ailing economy, which contracted even more. Also spoke a bit about gender-based violence and femicide, saying that as much as the Freedom Charter says that there shall be houses, security and comfort, but women in South Africa feel unsafe, society must work together to fight the scourge of gender-based violence. So that's in a nutshell what came out of that webinar organized by the ANC to celebrate the 65th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter, as well which happened at the Congress of the People.